Okay. Hi, Jordana.
Hi, Julia. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm ready to make some challah.
I am too. We're very excited to be able to have a virtual Adobo Dough program.
Definitely.
We have been hosting the Adobo Dough program at the Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust for several years now. This is our first time doing it virtual. The Los Angeles Museum of the Holocaust is the first survivor-founded Holocaust museum in the United States. It is a primary source institution that commemorates those who perished, honors those who survived, and houses the precious artifacts that miraculously weathered the Holocaust. Since 1961, the museum has provided free Holocaust education to students and visitors from across Los Angeles, the United States, and the world, fulfilling the mission of the founding Holocaust survivors to commemorate, educate, and inspire. The museum is always open 7 days a week, unless coronavirus has taken over as a pandemic. Yet admission and our programs are always free. And we're really looking forward to hosting our Adobo Dough program today.
So the Adobo Dough program, if you haven't participated in it or heard about it before, is a program that was founded years ago by a couple of mothers in our community who had the idea of bringing Holocaust survivors in the LA area together with their kids who were students, and they wanted to create an environment where they could exchange stories, get to know each other, and have really personal conversations and connections, but in a kind of a smaller and more intimate setting. And so they had the idea to come together over the tradition of making challah. Since they came up with that idea, we've been bringing the program all over LA and beyond, to high school students, middle school students, community members of all ages, and we're so excited to be able to bring it to you today. So Jordana and I, for this first part of the program, are going to be teaching you how to make the challah dough. And then later on, we'll do a live session of how to braid it, and you will get the opportunity to hear from a Holocaust survivor. But for now, we are just walking you through the bread making portion. And we will be sharing along the way some anecdotes and some information about kind of the symbolism behind the various ingredients that go into challah. We may have some friends joining us, such as
Yali. He wants to learn how to make challah today.
Exactly. And I also have a dog here who might interject with the bark here and there. So be prepared for that.
Do we typically make challah dough for our Adobo Dough programs at the museum?
We don't. We usually get the dough already made from a bakery in Los Angeles called BB's that we've had a wonderful relationship with for years. And then during the program, students are able to just braid the dough with Holocaust survivors and kind of chat while they're doing so. But since we are all at home now, we thought that it would be a really fun activity to give you the tools to make your own dough. If you don't feel baking inclined, know that this is a forgiving dough and great for beginners, but you can also go ahead and see if your local bakery is selling kosher challah dough, and then join us for the braiding portion.
This is one of my favorite programs. I think because we get to use all five senses. We're learning about tradition and heritage, we're connecting with other people, and we're braiding both tradition and bread. And it turns out delicious. So we should get started.
Exactly. Okay, so you have the ingredients list, hopefully already, and then you'll need a few different bowls, measuring implements, and a flat surface to work on. And without further ado, let's get started with the first set of ingredients. So you can either use a packet, or if you, like me, have a jar of live yeast, you're going to want to use 1 tablespoon. So measure 1 tablespoon of live active yeast into a large bowl, the largest bowl you have, because ultimately all of your ingredients are going to get measured into this container. Yeast is what enables our dough to rise and represents growth and expansion. So as we add the yeast to the bowl, we can think of each one of our family members and friends and pray that they grow and expand in their emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being.
Great. And next we are going to be adding water. So I will mention that Julie and I are trying to do 2 different challah recipes. We encourage everyone to use their own challah recipe at home if it's been in their family for generations, if they just found it last week, or if it's something they're trying that's new. So we are now going to add 1 1/4 cups of lukewarm water to the yeast. And the water brings life and nourishment to all things. So it represents the attribute of chesed, which means kindness. And as we add water, we can think of someone in our lives that we want God to bless with an abundance of kindness and chesed that we can bring to them. And this is something that we can just meditate on as we're pouring the water.
And you'll also want to add to this mixture in the large bowl 3 tablespoons of sugar, just regular sugar, not brown. Measure it in there with the yeast, and it helps to activate it. Sugar also represents anything sweet in our lives, so we ask God for sweet blessings at this time.
Oh yeah, I forgot the sugar, but now I remember it. I have it here.
You'll notice also that in the recipe, it calls for more sugar. The rest will be added later, but for now, just add your initial 3 tablespoons. And then give that mixture a little stir. It's not going to be totally incorporated yet. You'll see lumps of yeast. That's okay for now. Give it a stir. I'm using a wooden spoon. You can use whatever you want. And then you can go ahead and cover it with a towel and set it aside.
Okay, so next we are going to have the flour. And should we use a different new bowl for this, Julia?
Yeah, so I'm going to use a medium-sized bowl. This is just going to be for the dry ingredients, which you will later add to your wet ingredients in the large bowl. This is a good size, but anything will work as long as it can hold about 4 cups of
4 cups of flour. So flour actually represents sustenance, as we can think, of course, because it's the foundation of so many of our yummy foods. And it is not just about our material well-being, though. It's also about our relationships with others. And we pray for sustenance from both our livelihood and our relationships. And that's something that we want to think about as we're pouring the flour. You know, what is something that sustains us? How have we managed to keep our well-being despite some of the stresses that are going on around us right now or anytime?
I'll also just add that I know that flour can be somewhat hard to come by right now, and it's okay to use different types of flour. I'm using a mixture of all-purpose white flour and bread flour. You can also throw in whole wheat or whatever you have on hand. Most recipes call for all-purpose white flour, but like I said in the beginning, this is a forgiving dough. So if you don't have all-purpose, work with what you've got.
So 4 full cups.
4 full cups. And bear with me because I actually recently lost my cup measure, so I'm using a half cup, which makes this a more time-consuming measurement process. Also, if you're new to baking and you're not sure what I'm doing, I'm just leveling off the top with a bread.
I'm not the best baker, so I'm a little haphazardy and I don't level off the top. So that's why challah is so great, because it's good. In fact, actually, challah, the word itself, has biblical origin. It used to, when you're reading the Bible or the Tanakh, it has a reference to a loaf or a cake. And this means that the word has been kind of incorporated into Jewish oral history for thousands of years. However, you know, there's of course like a whole section of rabbinic thinking where challah often refers to the portion of dough which is separated before baking, which we'll definitely get to in the baking part of this, so after our dough has risen. So it's a very important word throughout history, but most recently, it really draws its roots from Eastern Europe, from bakers in what is now Poland, Russia, Ukraine, and it is this delicious bread that we know and love.
So even as I said that, I'm a little bit worried that I lost count and measured in too much, but we'll see what happens. Meet that when it comes. Okay, I'm caught up to you. So the next thing that you're going to want to add and make sure that it's going in with the dry ingredients, not the wet, is salt. You want to add 1.5 teaspoons of salt, as well as the remaining 3 tablespoons of sugar to the bowl with the flour. And salt enhances the flavor of the dough. It also draws out blood and keeps in juices. So as you add the salt, we all pray together for humor in our lives, and that God may draw away the bad and protect all the good in the lives of those who we love, which I think is especially important right now, recognizing all the good that we have and trying to sustain it, add to it, and keep it locked in like salt does on meat. And I said it kind of quickly, so don't forget you're also adding the remaining 3 tablespoons of sugar.
And I'm just going to step away to crack my eggs into a bowl. I'll be right back.
Egg, remember, just the 1 egg for now. Oh, you're using a different recipe. So the nice thing about challah as well is that once you have all your ingredients out, you actually don't need that much space. So if you're in a small apartment or don't have too much counter space in your house, that's totally fine. You only need a little flat surface that you can knead on. In the future, I'm hoping to invest in a giant sized silicone baking mat that I can knead on that and just throw it in the sink. But for now, a counter is perfect. I also just spilled sugar all over the place, which is part of baking, except that your kitchen is going to get a little bit dirty.
I'm sure your dog will love that.
My dog is actually a very picky eater. So we'll see. Maybe he'll mop it up, maybe not.
Sugar for you.
Once you have added all the dry ingredients together, just incorporate them. You want to make sure that the sugar and salt are kind of evenly distributed throughout the flour. It doesn't need to be perfect, but give it a little bit.
This is just the flour, the sugar, and the salt, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I also like extra sweet dough. I have a sweet tooth, so I'm actually just going to take a little extra sprinkle of sugar and throw it in there. Okay. So that is all the dry ingredients that we have. It's as easy as that. So you're going to want to return to the bowl that you covered and set aside, and uncover it and bring it back to your workstation. You should see some nice happy bubbles in your yeast. It's not going to be like foaming at the surface or anything like that, but if you see a little bit of activity on the top, it means that your yeast is active and will actually make your bread rise. If your yeast is really, really old, it might not be as effective. So the bubbles on the top of the surface with the wet ingredients is a good sign that you are in business with your yeast. Jordana already took care of her eggs, but I'm just going to use the measuring cup that I used for water and crack my egg into it.
I know, Julia, you are the pro baker. This is only the second time I've made challah, so I'm excited to see how it turns out. I've probably braided challah in our Ladova dough programs hundreds, if not thousands of times, but the making of the dough, I've always left to more capable bakers.
I'm the pro baker who just cracked shell into my egg, so don't worry. I'm not very far ahead of you, trust me.
Okay, so we're going to be adding the egg to the yeast and water mixture. And eggs represent the renewal of the life cycle and the potential of what is about to hatch. When we're making the dough, we pray for life, for more healthy children, for more abundance, for more pets, just thinking about what the future can hold and how the world exists in this life cycle. So maybe you're planting new plants or you've just adopted a new pet. The creation of life is such a beautiful thing.
I'm going to take the same measuring cup and measure my oil into it. So the recipe calls for a 1/4 cup of olive or vegetable oil. I'm using olive oil today. You can also use melted butter. Different recipes will call for different things. I have a lot of olive oil on hand, so that is what I'm using.
Ooh, I bet butter would taste so good, but I'm also going to use olive oil, which always reminds me of the beautiful olive trees that you can see in the Mediterranean area, like in Israel. I have a beautiful olive tree myself, and I love looking at it and thinking about how they've lasted for hundreds and thousands of years.
Beautiful.
So it's a 1/4 cup of olive oil.
Yeah, a 1/4 cup. And oil represents anointing, as it was used to anoint the Jewish kings. So when we add our oil, again, to the big bowl, the wet mixture, put in a little bit at a time, anointing each one of your loved ones by name. So you can speak their names out loud, or you can think them to yourselves, and pray for their specific needs. So this is a moment to kind of meditate on your love for your friends and family, think about their various needs, and send them prayers and goodwill. I also think that whether you're beginner or advanced, making dough, for me at least, is a really meditative experience. And once you kind of have your footing in the kitchen and know what ingredients are going in, you can take the time to really reflect, be by yourself, and enjoy the process of creating something for those who will ultimately get to enjoy it with you. So that is the end of your wet ingredients as well. You're going to want to go ahead and incorporate the oil, eggs, yeast, water, sugar mixture, and make sure that it's fairly well combined. Again, given that it's oil and water, it's not going to be homogeneous or perfect looking, but you want to make sure that the ingredients are holding hands in there.
So I have a question. Mm-hmm. If I wanted to add a little bit of honey to make it extra sweet, is this where I would do it?
Exactly.
Okay.
So sometimes I'll add honey. The first time I used this recipe, I felt like it wasn't quite sweet enough for my sweet tooth. So I usually will add like a tablespoon or 2 of honey. I think today I'm just going to add straight up sugar and see how that goes. I'm actually adding even more than I normally would. So I'll probably make for wonderful French toast. Okay, you've done everything in the ingredients department. Congratulations. At this point, your dough is well on its way, and there are probably very few things that you could do to make it not taste delicious. So congrats, step 1. You're gonna want to incorporate your dry ingredients into the wet ingredients little by little. So take your medium bowl full of flour and salt and sugar and add it into your large bowl that has its wet ingredients in it. You can do this using a wooden spoon. I'll probably just go ahead and dip my hands in. We should have started this video by saying wash your hands. I hope that you all did anyways. But I actually find this part fun to do with your hands because it makes it a very tactile experience. And as Jordana said at the beginning, this is an activity that engages all 5 senses. This is also, if you're cooking with your kids, a really fun way to make them feel like they're being rebellious in the kitchen and let them actually touch the wet dough with their hands.
So I have a question. If I put my wet ingredients in my small bowl and my dry ingredients in my big bowl, is that okay? So should I pour it into the big bowl?
Yeah. You're going to want to have everything in a big bowl just so that it's not overflowing out, but it doesn't really matter whether you're adding dry to wet or wet to dry. It'll still turn out dough. This is also a good moment to mentally prepare yourself because our next phase is kneading. And so you'll need a little bit of energy and vigor. A little bit of help from your cats, you know.
Bialy's just sad that we're making challah, not Bialy's.
I feel like she's the star of the show. I'm happy to have her participating.
He's normally sleeping at this time, so I guess he came down to the kitchen just to be a part of this experience. He's named for another type of bread that comes out of Eastern Europe, so maybe he felt that it was his right to be a part of it.
Okay, so just a note on texture and I guess bread in general. If you've made like pancakes, cookies, things like that before, and you've baked in the sweets department, oftentimes recipes will say fold together until just incorporated because they don't want you to overmix as it will take the air out of the dough. That's not the case with bread. You don't have to worry about just folding until incorporated. You're going to ultimately be working a lot of air into it. That's part of the kneading process, and will result in better bread. And so at this point, you can really kind of go in there with your hands or with a wooden spoon and make sure that everything is quite incorporated. Also, different breads, if you have partaken in the sourdough craze or have made bagels before, those doughs have very different texture than challah, so don't worry if your bread dough doesn't feel like other doughs that you've worked with, or like cookie batter, or like anything else. As I said, if you've used these ingredients in the correct proportions here, like you're in business. You don't need to worry.
I actually find it easier to use your hands than a spoon.
Definitely. A great tool too, if you're ready to level up in your baking utensils, is this. It's called a baker's spatula, and it's really good for just like wiping off your hands or wiping off your surfaces. It's bendable and silicone, so I love this. Good thing to have. So I think my dough looks pretty incorporated. I would call the texture shaggy. I'll hold it up for you guys to see. It's not smooth. It doesn't look like you want it to look yet. It breaks apart really easily, and that's because the gluten in the flour has not developed yet. And that is what we'll do with kneading. So for now, I'm going to give my work surface, which is my small counter here, a really good dusting with flour, and I'm going to turn my dough out onto the surface and begin kneading it. The kneading process, you should do it for about 10 minutes. If you want to set a timer, that might be helpful. You could set a timer now. I like to go based on the texture, and just kind of noticing when the dough begins to change texture, I'll know that it's ready. But if you feel more comfortable your first time setting a timer, that is perfectly fine.
I'm also working in a small space.
That's what we can.
How sticky should this feel?
It should feel pretty sticky at this point. You will continue to add flour as you need in order to not have it stick to your surface. But on that note, I also want to say beware of like going crazy adding flour. Having too much in your dough will make it drier. So just add as much as you need to keep it from sticking to the surface. I also am pouring my flour into the bowl that I used for dry ingredients, just that I don't have to keep reaching in with my yucky hand into the flour container and have it easy access.
Okay, so what would your kneading techniques be right now?
Okay, I'll turn it down so you can see. It's kind of, here, I'll show you.
I will too as well.
You are using a little bit more flour. You're using the heel of your hand. You can also notice that my couch has a large tarp on it because my dog is a crazy animal. But you're using the heel of your hand to knead forward and then fold it back on itself like this. And again, this kind of process of stretching, folding, and pulling helps the gluten in the dough develop, and so it becomes more firm, and you'll notice as you go that it becomes less sticky, more kind of firm and taut, and it will smooth out as well. It won't do that at first, so don't get frustrated if you're not noticing your dough get smooth or anything. You need to give it a bit of time to let the gluten develop. But you will get there, so just keep using the heel of your hand and folding it back over itself.
Where did you learn or develop your love for baking?
That's a really good question. When I was in college, here's the honest answer. When I was in college, my senior year of school, I found that baking bread was a really good way to make me focus on getting my homework done on Sundays, because it takes 2 rises. You have to be around, but it's not like a super active process once you've added all the ingredients. So I was like, okay, I'm going to make the dough, and then I have to sit down for 2 hours until the second rise. Or, I had blocked out amounts of time for myself, and it helped me study. And I also loved having bread to share with my roommates. So that's kind of where it began. And now I think that it's just like a super satisfying process.
That's a really good study tip.
So since we'll be at this for a few minutes, we thought it would be a really fun moment to get in a little bit of learning. And so I asked Jordana if she would be willing to share a little bit about a topic in Holocaust history and education that I think is really, really interesting and pretty remarkable. And so we would love to hear a little bit from Jordana about terrazine, or Trajan stuff.
I'm so happy to do it. I will mention that we did also consider dancing right now.
That's true.
We weren't sure that we would be able to dance and bake. Also, I'm a terrible dancer. Julia was inspired because we just heard from a Holocaust survivor named Phil Rauscher. And when he first moved to the United States, he was trying to meet a nice woman. And so he attended dances at his local, I think, synagogue or Jewish community.
Yeah.
And this was in Ohio, right, Julia?
I think so, yeah.
And so his English, he had a very strong accent, and he said that he never would get a second dance because girls were turned off by his accent. And so he decided to take,
Or had trouble understanding him.
Or had trouble understanding him. And so he decided to take dance lessons so that even though he couldn't woo women with his with language, he could do so with dance. And so he became a great dancer, and that's how he eventually met his wife. And so eventually I think Julia and I should take some dance lessons, because clearly we don't feel confident enough to dance here.
So true, well put.
And what did he say? He said that if he could conquer the war, he could conquer dance.
Exactly. If he could survive the war, he could learn how to dance. And so I'm like, if we can make challah, we can learn how to dance. How about that?
I've talked about the Holocaust to many people, but I don't think I've ever done it while getting an upper arm workout or while kneading challah dough. But I know that you're interested in Theresienstadt, also known as Terezín in Czech. It was located right outside of Prague, and it was initially kind of set up as a crossover between a ghetto and a concentration camp. And the Nazis both held Jews there for long periods of time and had forced labor like in concentration camps, but they also functioned as a ghetto. People were able to kind of wear their own clothing and didn't have the striped uniforms that we're used to seeing when we look at photographs or hear stories of concentration camps. And what was really unique about this space is that because it was close to Prague, which at the time was a huge cultural city, very cosmopolitan, music writers, composers, artists lived there. A lot of Jewish people who happened to be in the arts also lived in Prague. And so they were deported to Theresienstadt because it was the closest camp there. And also many people from Germany as well were sent there. So you have this huge influx of people, excuse me, sorry, I needed to get more flour. So you have this huge influx of people who are in the music and arts. And the fact that it was both a camp and a ghetto meant that there was sometimes an easier way to smuggle in art supplies and prisoners started creating art there. Music was composed, art was created both in the kids camp and by adults, and it's just really beautiful to think about how human beings can maintain their human dignity despite the atrocities that are happening around them. That even, you know, if you think about the Holocaust as a process of dehumanization, you can also find the moments in which people maintain their human dignity as human beings and resisted with their intellect and their spirits. So it's actually a very both complex but inspiring pieces of Holocaust history.
And I think a word that or a term that I have heard used talking about Theresienstadt is spiritual resistance, and how the music and art that came out of that camp was really, as it was being created and composed, acts of resistance, because the people who were held there were creating despite the conditions that they were in, and despite being told that they shouldn't, and they resisted the oppression by doing what they could, which was creating art in that situation.
Yeah, in fact, at the museum, we have an incredible collection of artwork from an artist named Eric Leslie. And he was an artist before Theresienstadt, and he survived, and he moved to Israel, where he was also an artist afterwards. It was very much part of his identity. And he didn't let Theresienstadt and his experience being enslaved there change that. And he once said that to paint is to live for him. He really felt that by painting, he was able to continue living. And when hobbies are important to people, I think they are very much a part of them. So those are the moments that we can really see when we look at Theresienstadt.
Absolutely. I was listening so hard, I feel like I got distracted from my dough. We're coming close to the 10-minute mark. I think that we've been going for about 8 minutes. I feel like I wasn't kneading quite as vigorously as I normally would because I was listening. But I definitely have still noticed a change in my dough. How I always describe it is you'll notice that it's going from shaggy to smooth. And that indicates that the flour has gotten some strength and has begun to develop by this kneading process. So you'll have to kind of look for and feel for that for yourself. This is what my dough looks like right now. So if I do this and kind of squeeze it, you can see that it's not like having a shaggy break to it. That's not to say that it's perfectly smooth or feeling like pizza dough. You can see that it's still like breaks in my fingers like that, and that's really normal.
Is this normal?
Yeah, no, that looks really good actually.
Is this not shaggy?
It's definitely smoothing out. I think that we might want to keep going, both of us, for a couple more minutes.
We definitely got distracted. Maybe dancing would have.
You know,
we had dance moves like Phil Rauscher.
Yeah, exactly. But basically, I always say that you are going to want to knead your dough a lot longer than you think. It's part of the fun, the workout element of it. But at this point, like if you have been kneading for 10 minutes and you're tired out, or you have somewhere to be, you're on a mission to get this completed, I'm sure that your dough is great and good to go. And so I'm going to kind of describe the next step while I finish up my kneading, so that if you want to, you can proceed. You're going to want to take another bowl, I would say, ideally somewhere between the size of your medium and large. If you don't have another bowl, you can take this moment to wash your large bowl, and then just pour a little tiny bit of oil in there. Maybe if you have cooking spray, you can use that as well. You just want it to coat the bowl so that as your dough is rising, it doesn't stick to the bottom and the sides.
So I will say that the last time I made that, I put a little bit too much oil in. So I think even if you just put the oil on your finger and then run your finger around the bowl, that would be good. Because definitely last time my challah dough was pretty oily. It still tasted delicious, but it definitely was a little bit more dense, I think, than normal.
Yeah. So you're not trying to like add the oil as an ingredient. You're just using it to make the dough not stick to the sides. Once you have it kind of rolled into a ball, your dough, you want to put it in a tight ball like this. Put it in the oiled bowl, cover that bowl tightly with saran wrap, and punch a few holes in the saran wrap so that it's locking in the moisture of the dough, but that there's room for it to breathe. And then cover the whole thing with a somewhat moist towel. It can be dry. I usually moisten it a little bit with water. And then put it somewhere relatively warm. If you're in Los Angeles, if your apartment doesn't have air conditioning like mine, you can just leave it on the counter and it'll be plenty warm. But you can also, if you do live in a cooler space, maybe put it underneath a glass window inside. You don't want it in direct sunlight because it might cook, but just somewhere a little bit warm. And then you're gonna wanna let it rise for about 3 hours. Last time I did this, I made my dough at 10 and had probably finished kneading it and put it in a bowl at 11, and then started the braiding at 3. So I guess that's 4 hours. And as it rises, you're gonna wanna go ahead and like give it a punch down every probably hour or an hour and a half. So you'll uncover it, punch your dough, and then leave it. It doesn't matter if it's not in a perfect ball again after you punch it. That's normal. You just, by doing that, are trying to get the air out of it so that it doesn't have all of these bubbles inside of it when it's ultimately cooked. So to summarize, when we're done kneading here, make your dough into a ball, put it in the lightly oiled bowl, cover it tightly with saran wrap, punch holes in the saran wrap, cover it with a towel, and let it rise and rest for 3 to 4 hours, punching down the dough about every hour and a half during that process. So you're going to want to punch it down probably twice during the rising process. Does that make sense, Jordana?
Yeah, I think so. I was able to picture it in my mind as you were talking.
Okay, good. And then you will be joining us for the braiding session. So we will meet you after the dough has risen, and we will continue the challah making process.
And we'll have a special guest with us. We'll be inviting a Holocaust survivor from our community. We're very fortunate to have so many Holocaust survivors who speak with us at the museum, who are willing to volunteer their time to share their story with the next generation. As we can tell, Bialy is very excited about it. And it's really an opportunity to not only learn about traditional cooking in Jewish culture, but to also hear the stories of elders in our community and think about how they can inspire us to create a more dignified future and really empower us to make changes so that we can build a world that has more mutual respect in it and kindness and kavod, as we talked about earlier. So I think that's a really wonderful opportunity in addition to learning how to braid challah.
So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Jordana, for joining me and bearing with me on this challah journey. And I'm so excited to see all of your final loaves and guide you through the braiding process. All right, enjoy.
And we'll see you soon.
Okay.
Bye.